It feels like pretty much for a year now, whenever people talk about the LA Clippers, there's one of two things that get brought up. The 3-1 lead that they blew, yes, sorry Clippers fans, that's the reality. And then another thing is that people don't trust the Clippers because of that lead that they blew. Those are pretty much the two things that I hear about the Clippers, and then a bit about Paul George, whether he's good or whether he's terrible. A few of those things, Kawhi Leonard every now and then, just a few other things, but mainly it's about those two things in isolation, and that's all cool and well if you don't trust a team for blowing a lead, that's fine. But at the same time, eventually you have to move on and look at their prospects going forward without really worrying about what happened in the past. I know that past does give us something to go off, but I think this is a different playing group. This is a different coach. There's a lot of different things that have happened. They've probably got their head in the game a bit more, the likes of Kawhi and Paul George. They realise they can't go around kind of separating themselves from the rest of the group and expecting to still have a good team culture. They can't go around missing every third game and expecting to have a good team culture. So they've locked in a bit more, and as a result, the team looks a lot better. Now, before I go any further, if you could drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel, that would be much appreciated. It just really helps out how the video goes. It's free and it would be cool. But everyone always talks about the Clippers and their struggles in the playoffs, not really about how the Nuggets made it tough for them, and not just the Nuggets being offensively fantastic, but also what they did defensively, which was mainly try to quell Kawhi Leonard, because through the first playoff series against the Dallas Mavericks, he was absolutely unstoppable. He was defensively, when he switched it on, he switched it on. And Luka Doncic got the praise, but Kawhi Leonard was definitely the best player in that series. No ifs or buts. He was fantastic. So he was the reason that they won that series. I mean, we know he was the reason because a few other players struggled in that series. Come to the Denver Nuggets series, and all of a sudden, they started double teaming him. They started getting him with length. They started forcing him to pass out of double teams to players that were non-shooters. You have Harrell on the floor, Zubac, even guys on the floor like Lou Williams were shooters in theory, but couldn't hit a shot. So that's what the Nuggets did, and it really helped their team and, well, hindered the Clippers. Because you look at the first 7 games of the playoffs for Kawhi, he was averaging 32 points a game, 5 assists on ridiculous efficiency, and then following those first 7 games, the last 6 games of the playoffs, 23 points a game, a bit over 6 assists, showing that he was playmaking a bit more, or was really forced to playmake a bit more, and his efficiency was down as well. So he went from superhuman levels to just good. Still playing at a very good level and a strong level, but it wasn't enough for a team that was struggling to get any other kind of production, and that's what the Nuggets really did well. However, what the Clippers were able to do in this offseason was bring in shooters. We've already seen they're the #1 shooting team in the league. They've taken a jump of nearly 5% on 3-point percentage this season. They look fantastic from beyond the arc. They're getting the exact kind of looks they want, and you bring in the likes of Luke Kennard. You bring in Serge Ibaka. Marcus Morris is shooting more. He's more embedded in the offense. Even Reggie Jackson, Terrence Mann, Patrick Beverley, the list goes on and on. All of these guys are knocking down their shots at a high percentage and at a high clip, which allows the likes of Kawhi Leonard to not get double teamed as much. It allows him a bit more time and space, and if they do want to double team him, if they do want to pressure him into making a pass, he's improved his playmaking over the last couple of years, and the team likes to see him playmake because it just often ends in really nice high percentage shots. Now, the Clippers do have some issues. We'll talk about them in just a bit. I don't think there's any team in the NBA right now without them, but it seems like the Clippers ones get highlighted a little bit more than other teams, at least from my experience listening and watching other people. However, an excuse for the Clippers is Kawhi Leonard has spent time out, nearly 10 games. PG has spent over 10 games out of the team. They're a new team with a new head coach, and they've still managed to be the 4th seed in the West and to have one of the best records in the NBA despite a few trying circumstances. They started the season on fire, and we're like, this is the Clippers team we want to see. Since then, they've trailed off, but for obvious reasons, as I mentioned. There have been a few issues. They've been struggling in the clutch. They've been struggling to create shots outside of Kawhi and PG. Even Kawhi and PG have been struggling to create shots as well. Some of this goes down to the fact that in some of these games, it's just been one of those two, and then the pressure is so solely on just one of those two to create that it normally doesn't end out too well. Then on a couple of occasions, it has been those two in the game, and it still hasn't worked out too well. So that is an issue that they have to deal with, but I think they can overcome that. They've got 2 players that are just bona fide scorers. They've got shooters around them. Ty Lue's a pretty good head coach. I think they've got the pieces in there to make it work. There could be a trade down the line which we might talk about, but I think without making a trade they could still make things work. Just outside of looking at the team, Kawhi Leonard is the difference maker. I know if PG cannot be what he was last season in the playoffs, in fairness to him, people pretty much brush over the fact that he was good against the Nuggets for 6 of the 7 games, and the 7th game was obviously the one that was the most memorable, unfortunately, for PG. But that series, he was pretty good. He picked it up. The Dallas series was inexcusable. I don't know what he was doing. No one really knows what he was doing. I guess it was the bubble. Give him that kind of an excuse, but it wasn't great. Lou Williams was terrible. Montrezl Harrell was terrible. You look down the list and there was just a lot of underperforming players, while Leonard was absolutely carrying that team in the first rounds. Unlike any other player in the league at that point in time, he was doing a fantastic job of it. He dropped off a bit in the Nuggets series, and we saw as he dropped off, the Clippers dropped off as well, because he was the man leading them to victory, and he's going to need to do similar things if the Clippers want to win a championship. Now, guys will lift it. I don't think Paul George will be the same player he was last year. They've got some more versatile options. They've brought in some different players. So all around, they'll probably be a stronger team than they were in last year's playoffs. But if you want to go up against the likes of LeBron James, Anthony Davis, even Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, the list goes on, the Phoenix Suns, there's a lot of strong teams in the West, and if they were to make the finals in the East, you're going to need some heroics from Kawhi Leonard, and he's proven he's more than capable of it, but he's just going to need to do it again. So that's why I think he's the difference maker. Kawhi Leonard, if he can do what he did in that Dallas series, just for the rest of the playoffs, well then the Clippers will be in good hands, and I would have them as a strong chance to make it out of the playoffs, regardless of anything else going on in that team. If Kawhi Leonard plays like he did in the first series against the Dallas Mavericks, the Clippers are a good chance to beat any team in the NBA. But we can talk about Kawhi a bit later. Just talking about the pairing of him and PG for a second, let's not forget how little these two played together, just the team as a whole. Like I mentioned, there was a lot of chemistry issues. They got rid of some of those issues. Montrezl Harrell, JaMychal Green, more outspoken kind of guys. I don't think it's a coincidence neither of them got re-signed. Doc Rivers, the coach, is gone as well. New coach, new players, new environment. I think Paul George and Kawhi have learnt their lesson not to do what they did last season. They're trying to play more together. Unfortunately, they have had some injuries, but still they're trying to get more time together on the floor, and building that chemistry is not something that should be overlooked. Look at the Miami Heat, the LA Lakers. I think they were the two teams with the best chemistry in the entire playoffs. At least what you saw from the bench reactions, just how much those teams were vouching for each other. You could see that they really liked each other, and in the end they both made the final. But just the Clippers as a whole, I've heard quite a lot of different opinions about the Clippers. Actually, that's not entirely true. Well, maybe a lot of different negative opinions. It's basically, oh, they play too slow, too much ISO ball, Batum, Marcus Morris, closing lineups, Reggie Jackson playing too much, Lou Williams liability. Can you trust any of these guys in the playoffs, in crunch time? Ty Lue, is he even a good coach? Is he an upgrade on Doc Rivers? Paul George, will he show up? Kawhi Leonard, well, there's not really too many question marks over him, but question marks over everything else. That's what I hear constantly. I don't really hear too much positive about the Clippers, when in reality, they have addressed some of their issues. They've got better as a three-point shooting team. Paul George is playing better. Like I said, they've now got players that can space the floor in the likes of Serge Ibaka. Marcus Morris plays in that closing lineup, Nicholas Batum. They've just added different looks, a new head coach that I think is quite underrated as a head coach. But just talking about a couple of those issues, Batum and Morris, do I know if they're going to be able to show up in the playoffs? Actually, Marcus Morris was decent in last year's playoffs. I don't have too many question marks over him. Batum, I don't know, he's been good for the Clippers. He's been knocking down a lot of his shots. He adds a little bit of extra playmaking, not too much. He hasn't been doing a ton of it. Adds some versatility on defense. Like, he's been good. He's been a good pickup. If you're going off his Charlotte days, it's just not really the same. But getting to the pace thing, something that people have talked about quite a lot, that the Clippers play quite slow. They are one of the 5 slowest teams in the NBA. But I look at the postseason last year. 5 of the 6 teams with the fastest pace in the league got eliminated in the first round. 4 of the 6 teams with the slowest pace in the postseason made it through to the Western Conference and Eastern Conference Finals. The Lakers, the Heat, the Nuggets, and the Celtics. Does that tell me that there's a direct correlation between playing slower and winning games? We can't really say that. But what I can definitely say is there's definitely not a detriment from playing slow. If 4 of the 6 slowest teams in last year's playoffs all made the Western and Eastern Conference Final. This season, the Clippers have been great offensively. This shouldn't be much of a surprise. I mean, we know they've got Kawhi, and PG has played fantastically when he's been on the floor. You've added some offensive-minded players. Batum, as I mentioned, has been knocking down shots. Lou Williams, Luke Kennard, when he's played, has been good. I still have faith when he gets on the floor, he can actually do a job for them. but they've been good offensively. There's not too many question marks over their offense. People want to talk about how they play slow. Clutch time has been an issue. I still have faith once they get their proper lineup together and actually get a few games with that lineup. I also feel like they've played quite a lot of tough teams in those close games. You look at the Nets games, you look at a few of those other games. Those have been those clutch game ones where they might have struggled, but they have been tough games to go up against with players missing as well. They could definitely just improve on a few things defensively. With all of this being said, the Clippers, they do have issues, as I've mentioned. Some have suggested trading for Kyle Lowry, shoring up that point guard position. A lot of people say they don't have that creator who can create for other people, who can just create when Kawhi Leonard or Paul George aren't making it happen. And that's kind of true to a degree. I still think Luke Kennard, you bring him in, you pay him $16 million a year, he's someone that in Detroit was averaging 15 and 4. He can run the pick and roll. He can create off the dribble. He can come off screens and hit mid-range shots, three-point shots. He's a deadeye. He just makes a lot of sense for that team as a kind of point guard, combo guard alongside Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. So he's not asked to do a lot of the ball handling responsibilities, but he does a bit and still spaces up as a shooter. It just makes a lot of sense. That's why they paid him. Recently, he played against the Wizards before the All-Star break and had his best game in a while, so hopefully that's the sign of things to come. Like, you haven't really given him too much of a chance before you cut him out of the rotation. The reality is, guys like Reggie Jackson, Lou Williams, I think we know their ceiling. With Kennard, you have a bit more unknown, you have a bit more potential, like we saw last season with Kennard. If the Pistons can get that out of Kennard, the Clippers should be able to get just as much out of him. Maybe not from a volume standpoint, but from an effectiveness standpoint, you should be able to get the same amount out of Kennard if the Pistons can do that. Just boost his confidence, whatever you need to do. I don't know. Tell him, hey, you're doing well, you're playing well, just pat on the bum, something that helps his game. Whatever you need to do. You paid him $16 million a year. Make it work. In terms of defensively, like I mentioned, they can get better protecting the rim. Some of that will come with a point of defense. Kawhi Leonard and Paul George will turn it up a notch in the playoffs, and that should help them. It slows down. It's not as easy getting to the rim in the playoffs. It'll crowd up a bit. Hopefully Ibaka and Zubac can improve their rim protection. They have been playing quite small, so it makes sense that their rim protection isn't the best in the league, but it could still get better. Offensively, they look fantastic. They're shooting the three ball lights out. They've got so many shooters surrounding Kawhi and PG who are also shooters, so there's not really any weaknesses from a shooting perspective. I'm not trying to stake my claim saying the Clippers are going to win the championship, but it's more to just say the Clippers have been playing pretty well this season. And when you look at what Kawhi Leonard was able to do last season, we know what he's been able to do for Toronto, in San Antonio, in the playoffs. He's a playoff monster when he gets things going, and they've put the right pieces around him, so hopefully teams can't really relentlessly double team him and get in his face, and he can't just be kicking out to guys who are bricking shots or not even taking shots in general. That should hopefully help him get better looks in this playoffs and maybe take it up another notch, because that's what they're going to need for them to win a championship. That's what I do know. Kawhi Leonard is going to need to go into beast mode like he did against the Dallas Mavericks for them to really reach that upper echelon and beat a team like the Lakers. With that being said, if you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Sub to the channel. Have a good day. I'll catch you next time. Bye.